Get comfortable. Turn the lights down or off, whatever you do. There's no hurry to any of this, and nothing tonight is going to demand anything of you. I want to start with something you already know how to do, because you've done it 100 times. You've cleared a vault. You've come down a slope in the dark with a pistol and a handful of bobby pins, found the collapsed entryway, pried open the panel, and walked in through a door that was already standing open because something opened it long before you arrived. You went down the entry corridor. You picked up a few things off a desk. You read part of a terminal entry and skipped the rest of it because the rest of it was 3 screens long and you had somewhere to be. You found what you came for. You left. Total time inside, 20 minutes, maybe less if you knew the layout. And in those 20 minutes, you learned everything about that vault that the vault was ever going to tell you. Which is to say, you learned how it ended. Tonight, we're not doing that. Tonight, the door is shut. It has always been shut. Nobody has ever pried the panel. Nobody has ever come down the slope. And there is no slope, because there is no entrance on any surface anyone has walked in 200 years. The door in the vault we're going into tonight was closed on the day the bombs fell, and it has not moved a quarter of an inch since. Not once. Not for a delivery, not for an emergency, not for a single person going out, and not for a single person coming in. The mechanism has been maintained beautifully. It has been inspected on a schedule for 2 centuries. It has never been used. And behind that door, there are people. There are about 1,000 of them, give or take, and that number has barely moved in living memory, which we'll get to, because the reason it doesn't move is one of the more interesting things about the place. Those 1,000 people are the children of the people who came down here on the 23rd of October, 2077. 3 generations, roughly. Some families are 4 deep now. None of them have ever seen the sky. You are one of them. That's the premise. You were born in a vault that never opened. You live in a vault that never opened. And unless something changes tonight, which it will not, you are going to die in one. And I want to be clear about the register we're working in here, because this is where most tellings of this go wrong, and I'd like us to avoid it. There is a version of this story that is about horror. You know that version. Everybody knows that version, because it's the one that gets made over and over. The sealed vault as a tomb, the experiment gone wrong, the terrible thing waiting at the bottom of the stairs, the skeletons arranged in the corridor in the exact positions they fell. That's a real thing that happened in some vaults, and it is not what we're doing, and it is not because I'm being delicate with you. It's because it isn't the interesting part. The interesting part is this. A closed system, sealed at a fixed moment in time, with a fixed population and a finite quantity of everything, has been running continuously for 200 years. Water has come out of taps every single day. Lights have come up in the morning and stepped down at night. Food has been grown, harvested, distributed, and eaten. Air has been scrubbed and moved and scrubbed again. Machinery built by people who have been dead for 2 centuries has been kept alive by people who have never met a stranger, using parts that ran out generations ago and had to be made again from the inside. That is not a horror story. That is an engineering achievement, sustained across 6 or 7 human lifetimes, by people who mostly did not know they were achieving anything, because to them it was just the shift. So there are no skeletons in this vault. There's a working building with a schedule. There are no raiders at the door, because there is no way to the door. And if there were, the door would still be shut. There is no terminal with a password you need to crack, because the terminals in this vault are all logged in all day, every day, by the people whose job it is to log into them. Nothing here is a puzzle. Nothing here is hidden. The people who live in this place have complete access to their own building, which is more than most people in the wasteland can say. And it turns out that complete access to a building is not the same thing as knowing what the building is for. Which brings me to the thing I actually want to spend 2 hours on. When you cleared those vaults, you skipped the terminal entries. Everyone does. But those entries are almost always about the same thing, in the end, which is paperwork. Somebody's requisition, somebody's complaint about their assignment, somebody's log of a maintenance item, somebody noting in the flattest possible language a decision that would go on to determine how several hundred people lived for the rest of their lives. And you never once wondered who counted the water. You never wondered who did the inventory, who signed off on the ration schedule, who decided how many people could be born in a given year, and who told the families. You never wondered what happens on an ordinary Tuesday, in a place where nobody can leave, and nobody can be replaced, and every single thing has to keep working, because there is no second option, and there is no outside, and there is no help. Tonight, that's your job. Not all of it, but a piece of it, for one day. Before we go down, one small thing, and then I'll leave you alone with it. If you're enjoying these, subscribing genuinely helps. And I do read the comments, so if you want to tell me where you're listening from, or which wasteland you'd actually choose if you had to pick one, I'd like to know. That's it. That's the whole ask. All right. The year is 2277. That number won't mean much on its own, so let me put it somewhere you can find it. 200 years, near enough, since the 23rd of October, 2077. It is the same year that, several hundred miles from here, a man walks out of a vault in the capital wasteland, and his daughter goes after him. And none of that has anything to do with you, and you will never hear about it. It's just where we are on the clock. The vault we're going into doesn't have a number I'm going to give you, and that's deliberate on my part. The numbered ones you know are the ones that were found, which means they were opened, which means their story is already over and already told. This one hasn't been. The people inside call it the vault, the way you'd call the town you grew up in the town. There's no other one to distinguish it from. Where it is, physically, is under a hillside, at the end of a service tunnel that was backfilled and collapsed in the first week, on purpose, by people following instructions. That's worth sitting with for a second. Somewhere in a pre-war office, someone specified that the approach tunnel should be brought down after occupancy. Someone else costed it. Someone typed it up, filed it, and went to lunch. The entrance you would have needed to find to clear this place in 20 minutes with a pistol was deliberately destroyed before anyone inside had finished unpacking. Above you, right now, if you could see through it, there's a slope of scrub and dead earth with nothing on it. No door, no terminal, no sign, Whatever weather is happening up there is happening to no one. Below that, through a great deal of rock and reinforced concrete, there's a corridor with the lights coming up in stages, because it's morning. And morning here is a decision the building makes at a fixed hour. There's the sound. That's the first thing. And it's the thing you'd notice if you arrived, and the last thing you'd notice if you'd been born here, which you were. It's the ventilation. It's a low, continuous, faintly uneven note, a shade under a hum, and it has been going for 200 years without a full stop of more than about 40 minutes at a time, and those stops are all in the log, all 11 of them, with dates. That sound is the closest thing this place has to weather. People here can tell you the mood of the building from it, the way a farmer reads a sky. There's the air itself, which is dry and slightly cool, and completely without smell, except in the growing decks, where the smell is so strong and so green that children get taken down there as a treat. There's the light, which is not sunlight and has never pretended to be. It comes up amber first, then whitens over about 4 minutes, section by section down the corridor, so that if you're standing at one end, you can watch the day arrive as a thing that travels toward you. And there's you, 26 years old, in a bunk you have slept in your entire adult life, in a room your mother slept in before you, in a building neither of you has ever left, with a maintenance rotation starting in 90 minutes and a seal check on the schedule that you'd rather not think about yet. The lights are coming up. Let's go down. You get up before the whitening finishes, because you always have, and because the 4 minutes of amber are the only 4 minutes of the day that belong to nobody. No shift claims them. No bell claims them. Your mother used to get up in them too, and she told you once that her mother did. And that's about as far back as anybody in a family here can usually trace a habit before the trail goes into the logs, and the logs don't record what time people liked to open their eyes. You are 26. You were born on the 3rd level, in the room the medical staff still call the delivery bay, even though it has held a bed and a sink, and nothing else for 140 years. You have a number on a card and a name that gets used by about 60 people, and a job, and the job is maintenance rotation, second shift, which means you are one of 9 adults responsible for keeping the mechanical systems of a sealed building alive against the ordinary and continuous intention of those systems to stop. That is the whole sentence. That is your life, stated fully, and you could say it in the time it takes to lace a boot. You lace the boot. The boots are not original. Almost nothing you touch is original, which is a thing worth holding on to, because the popular idea of a vault is a preserved place, a bubble of 1970-something floating intact under 200 years of dirt. And that is not what this is. The boots have been resoled from belt stock. The bunk frame is original steel with a mattress that has been rebuilt 11 times by people whose names are on the requisition slips in a drawer 3 levels up. The mattress is one of the few things where the count is exactly known, because the fabric shop keeps a separate ledger, and the fabric shop is run by people who enjoy that sort of thing. You wash at the basin. The tap gives you a measured volume and then stops. And it stops the way a sentence ends, not the way a thing breaks. And you have never in your life turned a tap that did not stop. The water is faintly flat on the tongue, and faintly metallic behind that. And it is the taste of water, to you, because it is the only water there is. Someone from outside would call it filtered, and someone from outside would be right, but there is no outside taste to compare it against, and so the flatness is not a quality of the water. It is simply what water is. You dress. The jumpsuit is blue with the number on the back, and the number is stitched, not printed, because the printing plant failed in the second generation and was not rebuilt, and somebody in the fabric shop decided that stitching would do, and it has done ever since. That is a sentence you could say about 100 things in this building. Somebody decided it would do, and it did, and now it is simply how things are, and the original way is a line in a manual that nobody reads because the manual describes a machine that no longer exists. Now, here is the part that is worth slowing down for, because everything else in this day depends on it, and because it is the single thing the outside world gets most wrong about a place like this. The vault was not a shelter. It looks like one. It was sold as one. There were brochures, and there was a film, and there were sales representatives in good suits who explained to your great-great-grandparents that a certain sum of money bought a place behind a door that could hold against a direct hit. And everything in that pitch was true in the narrow sense that the door does hold, and the building is still here. But a shelter is a building whose purpose is fulfilled by the survival of the people inside it. That is the definition. And by that definition, this is not one, because the survival of the people inside was never the point. It was the condition. It was the thing that had to be true in order for the actual purpose to be measured. The actual purpose was the measurement. Vault-tec built a great many of these, and they were not identical. And the ways in which they were not identical were not accidents of budget or geography. They were the design. One had a population deliberately imbalanced. One had a power supply set slightly short of demand. One had an overseer given authority far beyond what the manuals described. And one had an overseer given none at all. And one had 200 people and enough food for 180. Every difference was a question somebody wanted answered, and the people living inside the difference were how the answer got produced. And the door is part of the design. That is the sentence that matters, and it is the one that takes a while to sit down properly in the head. You would think the door is the neutral part. The walls, the food, the air, the rules, all of those you could imagine somebody tuning. But the door feels like the one honest component, the one piece of the building that is simply a door, that opens when it is safe and stays shut when it is not, and does so for reasons of physics rather than reasons of policy. It is not. The door is on a protocol. Every vault's door is on a protocol, and the protocols vary, and the variation is the experiment. Some were set to open on a timer. Some were set to open when the internal instrumentation read the surface as survivable. Some were set to open on a signal transmitted from somewhere else by somebody else. And some, and this is the relevant category, were set to a condition that would in practice never be met by people who understood perfectly well that it would never be met, and who wrote it down in a specification and passed the specification to an engineering department and went to lunch. Your door has never opened. Not once. Not for a test. Not for a repair. Not for an hour. 3 generations of maintenance staff have walked the door corridor with a clipboard and logged a reading and walked back. Your grandmother did it. Your mother did it. You are doing it today at 1400, and you would rather not think about it yet. And you're thinking about it anyway, which is normal, and which is one of the reasons people trade that particular duty away when they can. So the myth to put down is the one where a place like this is a rescue that went wrong. It did not go wrong. Nothing here has failed to work as intended, which is the uncomfortable part. The lights come up. The water is metered. The population holds steady. The door stays shut. Every one of those is a system performing exactly to specification. And the specification was written by a person with a desk. That is not the same as saying the people who live here are victims in every waking moment. And it would be dishonest to leave the thought there, because it isn't how the day feels from the inside. From the inside, it feels like a job. It feels like a small town with a low ceiling. Most of what happens to you today will be ordinary, and some of it will be genuinely good. And a fair amount of it will be difficult in the way that any Tuesday can be difficult. And none of that is contradicted by the fact that the shape of the whole thing was chosen for you before your great-great-grandparents signed anything. Both are true at once, all day, permanently. And people here manage that the way people anywhere manage a fact they can't change. They mostly don't hold it in mind. They hold the schedule in mind instead. So, the schedule. Your day has 3 fixed points on it, and everything else is filler that will expand or contract to meet them. The first is the shift itself, which starts at 8 and runs the length of a working day, and which begins with the tool inventory. And today's docket includes a fan housing on the 2nd level that has been repaired 11 times and will be repaired a 12th. You know it will be a 12th because you know what the last 3 repairs were, and you know what has not been done, and you know why it has not been done, which is that the part required does not exist, and has not existed for a long time. And so what happens instead is a sequence of increasingly ingenious ways of making a thing that is wrong continue to be adequate. The second is the seal check at 1400, which is the door corridor and the clipboard and the reading, and which takes 40 minutes, including the walk, and which is on your rotation this month, whether you like it or not. The third is the council in the evening, after the shared meal, which you would ordinarily skip, and will not be skipping tonight, because the item on the agenda is a pump. The pump is on the reclamation side. The pump has been giving a sound for 11 days that you personally do not like, and you have said so twice. And tonight is the night it becomes a matter for a room full of people, rather than a note in a logbook. Somewhere in among those 3, there is a ration count that you have been asked to witness, because counts are witnessed by 2 people from different rotations. And this month, that is you. And it will take 20 minutes, and it will be boring. And it is the sort of thing that keeps a place like this from quietly falling apart in the 3rd decade of somebody's small dishonesty. The light in your room has finished whitening. It sits at full, even shadowless, and it will sit there for 16 hours, and then it will step down again. And it will do that tomorrow, and it did it yesterday, and it did it on every day of your mother's life, and her mother's, and the log will record that it did. You pick up your card. You check the number on it, which you have never once needed to check. And you check it anyway, because your hands do it. Then you go out into the corridor, where the day has already arrived, and travelled past your door, and gone on down the hall ahead of you, section by section, all the way to the wall. The washroom for your section is 4 doors down, and serves 11 people, and at this hour it serves 3 of them, because the second shift wakes in a staggered pattern that somebody worked out a very long time ago, and nobody has seen a reason to change. You are the middle of the 3. The man who wakes before you is always finishing as you arrive, and he always says the same 2 words, and you always say them back, and neither of you has ever extended the conversation past that in 9 years of standing in the same doorway at the same hour. The tap is metered. This is the first thing to understand about washing here, and it is the thing that would take a stranger longest to stop noticing. You put your card against the plate on the wall, and the plate reads it, and the tap gives you what the plate has decided you are owed, and it gives it at a pressure that has not varied in your lifetime, and it stops when the allowance is spent. There is no handle. There has never been a handle. The idea of a tap you could simply open and leave open is something you have seen in the training reels, and did not entirely believe the first time, in the way that you did not entirely believe the sky. You get 4.5 liters a day for everything that is not drinking. Drinking is separate and comes from the mess. 4.5 covers washing, laundry against a schedule, and the small unglamorous business of a body. And it is enough, and it has been enough for 200 years. And the reason it is exactly 4.5 rather than 3 or 6 is worth stopping on, because that number is not a guess, and it is not a kindness. It is the output of a machine divided by a head count. Here is what actually happens to the water in this building. Nothing leaves. That is the whole design, stated as plainly as it can be stated. Every drop that came down the shaft with the original fill is still here, in some form, in some tank, in some pipe, in the air, in a plant on the growing deck, in you. The vault does not consume water. It circulates water and loses a little each cycle to leaks and to seals, and to the small amount that goes out with anything that is thrown away. And the whole of the reclamation system exists to make that loss as close to 0 as engineering in the middle of the last century could get it. So the system takes everything. Wash water, laundry water, the condensate that forms on the cold side of every ventilation run, and gets caught in trays that somebody has to empty. The moisture in the air that the dehumidifiers pull out of the corridors. And yes, the rest of it, the part that people who have never lived in a closed system get squeamish about. It all goes to the same place. It is filtered through media beds, run through a distillation stage that costs more power than anything else in the building except the lights, and comes back out at the other end as water that is chemically better than anything that ever came out of a pre-war municipal tap. It tastes of nothing. That is the flavor of it, and it is a real flavor. And you noticed it for the first time as a child when someone described rain to you, and you tried to imagine what water would taste like if it had been anywhere. Yours has been nowhere. It has been in this building, and in the people in this building, and in the pipes, and back again, over and over, for longer than any nation on the surface has managed to hold itself together. The 4.5 liters, then, is the distillation stage's daily throughput divided by 261 people, with a margin held back for the growing decks and a further margin held back for failure. That is all. There is no committee that decided you deserved 4.5. There is a machine that produces a number and a population that has been held steady at the size the machine can carry. And the ration is simply the arithmetic of those two facts, written onto a card, read by a plate on a wall. You wash with the efficiency of somebody who has never in their life done it any other way. There is a technique, and everyone here has it, and nobody was ever formally taught it. You wet, you stop the flow. You work, you rinse. The stopping is the part a stranger would fail at. Your hands stop the flow without consulting you. The pipes in this washroom are not the pipes that were installed. That is the second thing worth stopping on this morning. And you think about it because you are standing with your palm flat against a run of it, and it is warm on the return side, which is correct, and cool where it should be cool. The building is 200 years old. Almost nothing in it is. The original copper in the wet sections went in the first 60 years, replaced with a steel alloy the vault had in stores, because somebody in an office in the 60s had costed out a service life and stocked accordingly. That steel went in the 2nd century, replaced with sections cut from stock that had been intended for something else entirely, and repurposed by people whose names are in the maintenance log and nowhere else. The section directly above your head is the 3rd generation of pipe to occupy that particular void, and it was fitted by a man whose granddaughter now runs the seed stock 2 decks down. So when you say the vault is 200 years old, what you mean is that the shape is 200 years old. The rooms are original. The concrete is original. The door, famously, is original. Everything between those things has been eaten and remade and eaten and remade, and the building persists the way a body persists, which is to say by replacing itself continuously, while insisting it is the same building. Somewhere in the walls, there is presumably some original fastener that nobody has ever had reason to touch. Mostly, there is not. Mostly, there is the work of 8 or 9 generations of people with a drawer of parts and a manual, keeping a machine alive past every projection ever made for it. The stores are the reason this is possible, and the stores are finite, and everybody knows the stores are finite, and that knowledge sits under this place the way the water table sits under a farm. It is not a crisis. It is a slope. Every component that comes out of the stores and does not go back is a small subtraction from a number nobody has ever announced, but everybody has estimated privately, and the estimates people arrive at differ by about 80 years, depending on how optimistic they are and what they are counting. Your own estimate, which you have never said aloud, is on the pessimistic side, and it has a great deal to do with a pump on the reclamation side that has been making a sound for 11 days. You dry, you dress, you put your card in the pocket where it lives, and you go down to the mess. The mess is one long room with the serving line at the near end and 11 tables, and the noise in it at this hour is the particular noise of 100-odd people who have known each other since birth, and have therefore run out of small talk somewhere around the age of 19. It is not a quiet room. It is a room without any conversational effort in it at all. People say things to each other in the middle of sentences begun days earlier. Breakfast is a grain porridge with something green folded through it, and a piece of fruit that is smaller than a fruit ought to be, and a cup of water that comes out of a different tap from the one in your washroom, and is counted separately. The porridge is good. It is not good because anyone is trying. It is good because it is the same recipe, made by the same rotation of people from the same yield for a very long time, and a thing made 10,000 times becomes good almost against its will. Where you sit is not assigned, and is also not free. The tables nearest the serving line are taken by the growing decks, because they come off shift as everybody else comes on, and they want to eat and go. The far end, by the wall, is maintenance, and has been maintenance for longer than anyone can account for. And if you asked why, the answer you would get is that it is nearer the stairwell, which is true, and which explains nothing, because so is the middle. The two tables in the center are where the administrative side sits, and the overseer's staff, and the woman who keeps the records, and the people whose work is paper rather than parts. Nobody stops anybody sitting anywhere. Everybody sits where they sit. You take your bowl to the far end and sit down opposite a man from your rotation, who has been eating for some minutes, and who says, without looking up, that the fan housing on 9 is on the board again. You say you know. He says it will be the same bearing. You say it will be the same bearing. He goes back to his bowl. That is the whole conversation, and it has communicated a work order, an opinion about the underlying fault, an agreement, and a shared and slightly weary joke about a component that neither of you has any authority to replace, and which will therefore come back onto the board again next month and the month after, in the same way it has come back for 11 previous repairs, each one logged, each one signed, each one adding a line to a document that has been growing since before either of your mothers was born. You eat. Somewhere behind the wall, on the other side of 2 feet of concrete, the reclamation stage is running, taking back what the building spent yesterday and handing it forward into today. And the number it produces is the number on your card. And the number on your card is the reason your hands stop the tap without asking you first. The mess empties in stages, the way everything here empties in stages, because the shifts are staggered so that the kitchen never has to serve 200 people at once, and the corridors never have to hold them. You put your bowl on the return rack, and the woman on kitchen rotation takes it without a word, and you go left out of the hatch and down 2 decks to the maintenance bay, which is where you will be for the next 9 hours. The bay smells of oil and hot metal, and the particular flat mineral smell of the solvent tank. It is one of the few places in the vault that smells of anything other than people and ventilation. You have loved that smell since you were 11 years old, and allowed down here for the first time, holding a tray, being useful in the way children are allowed to be useful, which is to say, barely. You sign in on the board. The board is a sheet of laminate with a grease pencil on a string, and it has been a sheet of laminate with a grease pencil on a string for longer than anyone can account for, which is a detail worth holding on to. The vault has terminals, has functioning screens, has a system that could in principle track who is on shift, and the maintenance deck has never once used it, because a grease pencil does not need power and does not need anyone to remember a password, and cannot be locked out by a fault 3 decks away. Your grandmother wrote her name on a sheet like this one. So did you this morning, in the same corner, because that corner is where second shift signs, and the top of the sheet belongs to first. Then you draw tools. This is the part of the day that a stranger would find strangest, if there were any strangers, which there are not. You go to the rack, and you take the roll that has your rotations number on it, and you unroll it on the bench, and you count the tools. Out loud, there are 41 of them. You know there are 41 of them. You have known there are 41 of them since you were 14. You count them anyway, touching each one, and when you have counted them, you initial the tag, and at the end of your shift, you will unroll the same roll and count the same 41 tools, and initial the same tag again. Nothing has ever gone missing. That is not the point. The point is that this vault contains a fixed number of objects, and no more will ever be delivered. And a 1/4-inch driver that falls behind a bulkhead is not a mislaid driver. It is a driver that has left the world. There is no replacement. There is no order form. There is a lathe on the machining side, and a stock of bar steel that has been drawn down for 200 years. And the man who runs it can make you a driver, and he will, and it will take him a day and a half, and it will consume material that cannot be replaced either. So you count 41 out loud, twice a day, every day, for your whole working life. Here is something worth slowing down for, because it is the hinge on which everything in this building turns. The overseer's authority in this vault is not personality. It is not charisma, and it is not force, and there is no mechanism by which it could be force, because there are 200 people here, and a handful of them are in any sense enforcement, and every single one of them has known everyone else since childhood. The authority is written into the plumbing. Vault-tec designed the overseer's office as a control node, not as an office. The door mechanism answers to it. The reclamation stage's output settings answer to it. The lighting schedule that steps the corridors up in the morning and down at night runs on a clock that is set from that room and nowhere else. The ration allocation is a number entered on a terminal that only that terminal can enter. When the vault was built, someone made a series of decisions about which functions of a sealed society should be adjustable, and by whom. And the answer they arrived at was, all of them by one person. And this is the part that people who have only seen a vault from the outside tend to miss. The overseer is not a tyrant. Yours is a woman in her 60s who did 30 years on the electrical side before she took the office, who is good at the job in the specific sense that she knows what everything in this building does, and who is, by every account you have, tired. She does not walk the corridors giving orders. She approves work boards. She signs off on parts consumption. She sits in the council 2 evenings a week and listens. But she can change your water ration without consulting anyone. Not because she is cruel, because the system was built so that she could, and there is no second key, and there is no committee whose approval the terminal requires, and there is no appeal written into the design, because appeal is not a plumbing function. Every generation of this vault has been fortunate in its overseers. in the sense that none of them has yet chosen to test what the position permits. Fortune is not a safeguard. It is just what you call the absence of a bad outcome that nothing was preventing. That is the shape of authority down here. It is quiet, and it is competent, and it is total. And the totality is a design decision made in an office before the war by someone who never had to live under it. Your first job of the shift is on 9. You take the roll, and a bearing that was pulled from stores this morning against a requisition signed last week. And you go up. 9 is a service corridor above the residential block, low enough that you walk it bent, wide enough that you can turn around in it if you plan the turn. The extraction fan for the block sits at the far end in a housing the size of a footlocker. You have been inside this housing 11 times. Not you personally, 11 times. Somebody has, 11 times, and the log says so, and 3 of those somebodies are dead, and one of them taught you how to do it. The fault is always the same. The bearing on the drive side runs hot, and eventually starts to sing. And the singing is what puts it on the board, because a resident 2 decks down hears a note that was not there yesterday, and reports it, which is a thing residents do here without being asked, because everyone in this building has grown up understanding that a new noise is information. You pull the cover, 6 fasteners, and you put all 6 in the tin lid you carry for exactly this reason. Because a fastener that rolls off a service corridor and down a cable run is also an object that has left the world. You back off the tension, lift the belt, and get your fingers on the housing, and it is warm, warmer than the corridor, warm in the way that tells you the diagnosis was right before you have looked at anything. The bearing comes out in your hand. You turn it. It grinds. You can feel the grit in it through the metal, a roughness where there should be a single smooth, continuous nothing, and you know from that feel alone that it has perhaps a month left if you put it back, which you will not, because you have the replacement. Here is what you are actually holding. That bearing was manufactured before the war in a plant that also made bearings for washing machines and for cars and for the fans in office ceilings. It is not a special component. It was never a special component. Nothing about it was designed for a 200-year service life in a sealed environment. Somebody drew it to a standard specification, and somebody costed it, and a purchasing department at Vault-tec bought a quantity of them calculated against an expected operating period, and that calculation is one of the more interesting documents in the world, if it still exists anywhere, because it tells you exactly how long the people who built this place expected it to run. You have opinions about what that number was. Everybody on the maintenance side does. The store's hold suggests a figure well short of 200 years. The stores are not empty, but they are not what they were, and the drawdown curve is a thing the deck talks about the way people elsewhere talk about weather. Think about the office where the order was placed. A room with strip lighting and a coffee pot, and a man with a quota, buying bearings by the crate for a project number, and going home at the end of the day, and having a normal evening, and never once in his life standing in a low corridor with grit in his fingers. His decision is in your hand. That is not a grievance. It is simply the truth of how a building like this works. Every constraint you live inside was a line item once. You seat the new bearing. It goes in cleanly, which they mostly do. because pre-war tolerances were good, and the housing has been kept true. You reset the belt, take up the tension, spin it by hand twice to feel for anything catching, and find nothing. You refit the cover, 6 fasteners out of the tin lid, all 6 counted, because that is also a count. Then you power it and stand and listen for a full minute with your head at the housing. And the note is right, and it is the note this corridor has made for as long as you have been alive. And you find that you are pleased in a small, quiet way that you would not describe to anyone. You log it on the way back. Date, deck, component, fault, action, initials. The line goes underneath 11 other lines, in 11 other hands, on a page that is soft at the corners from being turned. 12 now. It will be 13 in a year or so. The bearing you just fitted came out of a box that had 2 left in it. There is a part to carry down, so you carry it. It is a length of feed pipe, a little over 1 meter, threaded at both ends, and it is going to the growing decks because the irrigation loop on the 3rd bed has been weeping at a joint for a week, and the horticulture staff have been patient about it in a way that means they will stop being patient soon. You have the pipe over your shoulder and a roll of thread tape in your pocket, and you take the stairs rather than the lift, because the lift is on the same power ring as the growing lights, and there is an unwritten rule, older than you, that you do not draw from that ring in daylight hours if you can walk instead. There are no daylight hours here. That is worth sitting with for a moment. The vault runs a clock, and the clock says day and night, and the lights obey it, and everybody's body obeys the lights. But nothing outside is participating. The word daylight in your mouth means the hours when the corridor panels are at full output. It has never meant anything else, and it will not. And when you read the word in a book from before, you understand it the way you understand the word ocean, which is to say correctly, and from a distance. 2 decks down, the air changes. You feel it before the stairwell door. The maintenance decks are dry and smell of metal filings and warm insulation, and the residential decks smell of people and laundry, and the same soap everyone has always used. The growing decks smell green. There is no other way to say it. It is wet air with something living in it, and it is heavier in the lungs, and after a minute in it you can taste it faintly at the back of your throat. And every single person in this vault, without exception, likes it. Children invent errands to come down here. Old people volunteer for jobs they cannot really do anymore. Nobody has ever admitted this out loud in a council meeting, because it would sound sentimental, and this is not a place that has much use for that, but the roster for growing deck assistants has never once needed to be filled by order. The light is the other thing. It is not white like the corridors. It is a deep, saturated pink-violet that makes your hands look strange and unfamiliar. And the beds run away from you in long racks, 4 high, stacked to the ceiling with trays, and the leaves under that light are almost black. You stand at the head of the aisle with a pipe on your shoulder and let your eyes adjust. And it is beautiful, and you have thought so every time since you were small, and you have never bothered to stop thinking so. Here is what a sealed population actually eats. The answer is less variety than you would guess, and more calculation than you would ever guess. Everything on these racks was chosen twice. Once before the war, by people selecting for yield per unit of light and per unit of water in a closed system, and once after, by 3 generations of horticulture staff quietly discarding what did not perform and keeping seed only from what did. The result is a short list. Potatoes, which are the backbone, because a potato is an extraordinarily efficient way to turn light into calories. Beans, for protein, and because they put nitrogen back. A leaf crop, several kinds, which are cheap in light and expensive in space. Tomatoes, which are inefficient and which everyone fights to keep. Grain in a small quantity, mostly for the ceremonial value of bread. Mushrooms in the dark rooms on the level below, which cost almost no light at all, and which do more of the work than the racks do, though nobody puts mushrooms on a poster. And there is protein from the tanks, which is the part visitors from a story would find unpleasant, and which you find entirely ordinary. Yeast and algae, grown in vats, harvested, pressed, dried, and turned into a pale block that is then cut and cooked into everything. It has no strong taste. It takes on whatever it is cooked with. You have eaten it every day of your life, and you do not think about it any more than you think about salt. The calculation underneath all of it is a single number, and the number is calories per person per day, and everything else in the vault bends around it. Every tray on every rack has a yield estimate, and the estimates are recorded, and the recorded yields are compared against the estimates, and the difference is where the horticulture staff spend their attention. A rack that underperforms for 2 cycles gets reworked. A rack that underperforms for 4 gets torn out and rebuilt with a different crop, and that decision goes to the council, because it is a change in the standing plan, and standing plans are not changed casually. You could describe the whole enterprise as farming, and people do. It is closer to accounting with roots. The woman who runs the seed stock is at the far end of the aisle on a stool, doing the thing she does most days, which is sorting. She is somewhere past 70. She has been in charge of the seed stock since before you were born, and she was assistant to the person who held it before her, and that person was assistant to the person before, and the line goes back to the original stores, which is a sentence that gets said with a certain weight down here. She has a shallow tray on her knees and a pair of tweezers, and she is separating seed by size, which she does by eye and by feel, and which she is faster at than any of the young staff who have been taught to do it with a screen and a gauge. You say good morning, and she says the deck and shift back to you, which is her habit, a kind of joke about protocol, so old it has stopped being a joke and become simply how she greets people. You tell her about the pipe. She tells you the joint is on the far side, second rack, near the floor, and that it has been dripping into a catch pan, and the pan has been emptied back into the loop every shift, so nothing has been lost. And she says the last part in a way that makes it clear she wants it on the record that nothing has been lost. You say you will note it. She nods once and goes back to the tray. There is a status gap between you, and both of you know exactly where it sits. She is senior staff on a critical deck, and you are maintenance rotation. And if she wanted a job prioritized, she could raise it at council, and it would be prioritized. But she does not do that, and the reason she does not is that she has watched maintenance rotations come and go for 50 years, and she knows precisely how much goodwill is worth against how much authority is worth in a building where the same 40 people will keep meeting each other for the rest of their lives. So instead, she keeps a tin on the shelf by the door with dried tomato in it. And anybody who does work down here gets told, not offered, told, to take some on the way out. This is not a bribe. It is not quite a gift either. It is the way an old person who understands the place maintains a relationship she will be in until she dies. You take the tomato on the way out later. Of course you do. While you are on your knees at the second rack with the thread tape, doing the joint, she talks, because she likes talking while she sorts, and you are conveniently trapped. She tells you the tomato line came within a hair of being lost 2 generations back, a blight that went through in a single cycle, and that the woman who held the seed stock then had, against standing policy, kept a private duplicate of everything in a sealed tin in her own quarters, which was a breach, which was written up, which is the only reason there are tomatoes. She tells this story the way people tell founding stories, and you have heard it 4 times, and you let her tell it. Now, the number that hangs over all of this. The vault's population does not move. It has not moved in any meaningful way in 3 generations. It sits within a handful of people of the same figure it has always sat at, and that is not luck, and it is not culture, and it is not an accident of fertility. It is a design parameter. The air handling was specified for a population. The water reclamation was specified for a population. These racks, this light, these vats, all of it was sized against a number that was chosen before the door closed, by people who calculated how many human beings a system of this size could carry indefinitely, and then built exactly that, and not 1 person more. So the population is managed. Births are scheduled, not forbidden, not rationed cruelly, not decided by anything dramatic. They are simply planned in a rolling way against the recorded deaths and against the projected capacity of the growing decks, and the plan is proposed by horticulture and health together, and approved by the overseer, and entered as a standing item. If the yield forecast is soft, the schedule slows. If a section of racks is rebuilt and comes back stronger, the schedule opens slightly. Applications go in, they are considered. Most are approved eventually. Some wait years. You grew up inside this, and it does not read as strange to you. It reads as arithmetic, but it is worth naming plainly what it is. The number of people who exist in this building is a function of how much light a set of pre-war lamps can put onto a set of trays, and that ceiling was set by a design office, and nobody in that office ever had to say the word children out loud. They wrote down a capacity figure. Everything since has been people living underneath it. You tighten the last turn on the joint, and run the loop, and watch for a minute, and there is nothing, no bead, no weep, and you wipe the pipe dry with your sleeve, so that if anything does come back, the water will show clean against dry metal. Behind you, the old woman is still sorting, seed by seed, under that violet light, keeping a line alive that started in a box. The lights step up a quarter for the midday hour, not brighter exactly, just warmer, the fluorescents on the residential corridors carrying a little more yellow than they do at either end of the shift. Somebody decided a long time ago that people eat better under warm light. And that decision is still running, unexamined, in a lighting schedule nobody has opened in 50 years. You come up from the growing decks with the sleeves of your coverall damp to the elbow and the smell of the trays still on you. And you take the stair rather than the lift because the lift on this side has been slow since spring, and the maintenance rotation has agreed, informally, that anyone who can walk should walk until the part comes back from the shop. That agreement is not written anywhere. It is not an order. It is simply a thing the 11 people who do this work decided among themselves, and it holds. And if you took the lift out of laziness, someone would notice, and nobody would say anything, and you would feel it for a week. The mess at midday is not a meal so much as a window. 2 hours staggered, so that the decks are never empty. You take a tray, and you take what is on it, which today is the flatbread they make from the grain rotation, and a portion of the greens that were cut yesterday, and a cup of the reconstituted protein that everyone calls by a name that has nothing to do with what it is. You sit where you always sit, which is not assigned, and might as well be. And then the hour begins doing what the hour actually exists for, which is trade. Here is the thing that takes people from outside a moment to absorb, if anyone from outside ever absorbed anything about this place, which they have not. There is no money here. None. Not a single cap in the building, not a note, not a token, not a scrip chit. The vault was provisioned to run without an internal economy, because the design assumed a closed population under a single authority for a fixed duration. And a closed population under a single authority does not need a medium of exchange. Everything is issued. Your calories are issued. Your coverall is issued twice a year, and the old one goes back into the fabric stock to be cut down into something else. Your bunk is assigned. Your work is assigned. In the accounting the vault keeps of itself, you are not a buyer of anything. You are a line item with a caloric intake and an output measured in shift hours. That is the design. What people actually do underneath the design is something else entirely, and it took about 1 generation to appear. Because issued is not the same as enough, and identical is not the same as equal. Everyone gets a coverall. Not everyone gets one that fits, and only 4 people in this vault can take a seam in and put it back so it holds. Everyone gets the same portion at the same hour. Not everyone likes it, and not everyone is hungry at the same hour, and the trays leave the mess with different amounts on them. Everyone is entitled to a bunk in a section. Not every section has a working vent at the head of the bed. So what circulates here is hours. Favors, if you want the soft word, but the residents keep it plainer than that. You owe hours, or you are owed hours, and the whole thing is held in memory and in a few private notebooks that officially do not exist. It is a real currency in every way that matters. It is scarce because there are only so many waking hours in a person, and most of them are already claimed. It is transferable because if the woman in laundry owes you 2, and you owe the man who fixes footwear 3, the 3 of you can settle it at a table without anything changing hands but agreement. It is denominated roughly in the hour, though the hour is not flat. An hour of standing in a queue for someone is worth less than an hour of your maintenance rotation. And an hour of maintenance rotation is worth less than an hour of the seed woman's attention, because there is one of her. Skill sets the rate. Everybody knows the rates, and nobody has ever written one down. And it clears, reliably, which is the part that would surprise anyone who thinks a currency needs a mint behind it. It clears because there are 300 and some people in this building, and there will be 300 and some people in this building for the rest of your life, and there is nowhere to take a debt. Outside, a man can walk. Here, the person you shorted will be at the next table, at the next midday, and at the one after that, and at your mother's funeral, and their grandchild will be assigned to your rotation. Enforcement is not a mechanism. Enforcement is the architecture. At your table, the woman who runs the fabric stock wants a bracket made, not requisitioned, made, because a requisition goes through the overseer's office and comes back in 11 days if it comes back at all, and she wants a shelf up before the winter linen count. You have a length of stock in the shop that came off a decommissioned rack and is not on any inventory because it was never a part, only material. You say you can do it Thursday. She says she will take your coverall in at the shoulder, both of them, the good one and the working one, and you say the good one is fine. That is the whole negotiation. It takes 11 seconds, and neither of you says a number, because both of you already know the number, and saying it out loud would be slightly insulting to both parties. Then you settle something older. The man across from you carried your rotation for 3 shifts in the spring, when you were laid up with the fever that went round the lower decks. 3 shifts is 9 hours, and 9 hours of covered rotation is heavy, and it has been sitting there since. He does not want hours back. He wants the vent above his bunk in 7B looked at properly, not the 10-minute look, but the kind where you pull the housing and clean the whole run and put a new gasket on, which is most of a shift on your own time. You tell him Sunday. He nods and goes back to his flatbread, and the debt is gone, closed, without a word of thanks in either direction, because thanks would imply it had been a gift. That is how the thing works. Gifts are rare here and slightly uncomfortable. Debts are constant and comfortable. A vault where everybody owes everybody a little is a vault that holds together. Now, none of this is how the world outside runs, and you know that, in the flat way, you know things you have only read. The textbook they teach out of on the education deck is a pre-war economics primer with a supplement bound into the back, and the supplement was written in this building by somebody's great-grandmother out of the material in the archive. It says that in the region the vault was sited in the years just after, a currency emerged based on bottle caps, and that the caps held value because a water merchant in a settlement called the Hub agreed to redeem them for clean water, and that this backing gave a worthless piece of stamped tin the one property a currency requires, which is that somebody will take it. You have read that paragraph. You have never seen a cap. There is not one in the building, unless there is one in somebody's drawer as a curiosity. And if there is, it is worth nothing except as a curiosity. The whole arrangement is hearsay to you in the strictest sense. Somebody wrote it down. You have no way to check it, no way to test it, no reason to doubt it, and no reason to believe it either. It sits in your head next to the pre-war footage of a coastline, in the same category, which is the category of things that are true and are not yours. And it is worth sitting with how strange that is, because it runs the other direction too. Out there, if any of it is out there, a currency exists because strangers will take it. That is the entire trick. Money is what lets two people who will never see each other again complete a transaction and walk away clean. It is a technology for dealing with strangers. There are no strangers here. There has not been a stranger in this building in 200 years. You know every face. You know every face is mother's face. And so the technology is not merely absent, it would be useless. And the thing that replaced it, which is memory and standing, and a running tally in 300 heads, works better than money ever could at this scale, and would fall apart instantly at any other. The vault's designers did not plan this. Nothing in the operations manual anticipates that the residents would develop an informal labor market inside a fully provisioned closed system. There is no form for it. The overseer's office does not acknowledge it, and never has, and the succession of overseers has sensibly chosen not to look at it directly, because it does the work of a dozen forms and costs the administration nothing. Which means the actual economy of this place, the one that gets shelves built and vents cleaned and seams taken in, is entirely outside the record. 200 years of it, and not a page. The tray goes back on the rack. The plates go into the wash line, where two people on rotation will run them underwater that will be reclaimed, filtered, and back in the tap by tomorrow evening, having gone around the way everything here goes around. You have Thursday for the bracket, and Sunday for the vent, and the afternoon still ahead of you. And the afternoon has the seal check in it, which is the one job in the rotation that nobody trades away, and nobody covers for anybody, because it is the one job that goes down to the door. The corridor to the door does not look like the rest of the vault, and it takes you a few steps to work out why. It is the paint. Everywhere else, the walls have been repainted on a cycle, section by section, decade by decade, and the color has drifted a little each time as the stock was mixed and remixed and stretched, so that the residential ring is a slightly warmer grey than the mess, and the mess is warmer than the maintenance deck, and nobody notices unless they walk the whole loop in one go. The door corridor has never been repainted. It is the original color, whatever the original color was, dulled and yellowed under 2 centuries of light. And walking into it is like stepping into an older room in the same house. Nobody lives down here. There are no quarters on this stretch, no workshops, no storage that anyone draws from weekly. There is a supply cage, a sealed conduit run, and the corridor itself, which is longer than it needs to be, and wider than it needs to be, and you have always suspected those 2 facts are the same fact, that the length and the width exist so that a crowd could stand here on the day the door opened and not be a crush. Your boots are loud. That is the other thing. In the residential ring, there is always somebody's radio, somebody's argument, somebody's child running a corridor they have been told twice not to run. Here there is the ventilation, and there is you. The ventilation note is different down here too. Lower because the ducting on this run is wider bore, and the air moves through it more slowly on its way to the return. The door is at the end. It is easy to say that it is large, And everyone does say that, and saying it does not prepare anyone for it. What you notice first is not the size, but the fact that it is a different kind of object than everything else in the vault. Every other thing here is a thing you could take apart. The pumps come apart, the fan housings come apart, the lighting circuits, the water reclaimers, the hydroponic racks, the door of your own quarters, all of it is a collection of components fastened together by somebody who intended, eventually, for somebody else to unfasten them. The vault door is not that. The vault door is one piece of a single decision, and it was made somewhere else by people who never expected it to be serviced. Here is what it actually is, because the shape of it explains the schedule of your whole life. The door is a wheel. Not a wheel in the sense of something that rolls, but in shape a disc of steel and lead cord plate, gear cut around its rim, sitting in a matching cut recess in the bulkhead. It is not hinged. Hinges fail, and a hinge is a single point where the seal is only as good as the pin. Instead, the door mates into its frame the way a lid mates into a jar, and the toothed rim engages a drive assembly set into the vault wall. To open it, a mechanical arm comes forward on rails and locks into the door's face, and then the drive turns, and the whole disc rotates a few degrees, walking the gear teeth out of their seats. Once the teeth clear, the arm pulls straight back, drawing the disc out of the recess, and then swings the entire mass sideways into a pocket in the wall so that the corridor is clear. The mass is the part that stops people talking. The door weighs on the order of 13 tons. You have heard 14, you have heard 12.5, and the number that appears on the plate in your own logbook is the one you write down without editorializing. There is no version of that number that a person can push. There is no version of it that 10 people can push, or 30. The gear arm is not a convenience. It is the only thing on this side of the door with any prospect of moving it, and the gear arm draws directly off the reactor bus, not off the general distribution, because whoever specified it understood that a door which cannot be opened during a brownout is a door that cannot be opened. And so the vault has, at all times, a dedicated power path to a mechanism whose only purpose is to perform an action it has never performed. You check it 4 times a year. The check is written out on a card that lives in a slot beside the panel, and the card is a copy of a copy of a copy, retyped by hand each time the previous one wore through. There are 9 items. You do them in order because the order is the order, and because the 3rd item only makes sense if you have done the 2nd. You check the drive assembly's grease reservoir and its level against the mark. You turn the manual indexing wheel, which is a small thing, chest height, entirely disconnected from the door's actual motion, and which exists only to prove that the gear train downstream of the motor is free. It moves a quarter turn against a stop and comes back. You listen while it does. It sounds the way it sounded in spring, and the way it sounded the spring before that. You check the rail bed for the arm, running a cloth along it, and the cloth comes back grey rather than black, which is what you want. You check the seat of the door against its recess with a feeler gauge at 6 marked points around the rim, and you write 6 numbers. And the 6 numbers are the same 6 numbers you wrote last time, within the tolerance printed on the card, which is generous. You check the pressure differential across the door with a manometer that is older than your grandmother and has been recalibrated twice against a reference instrument that lives in a padded box in the records room and is otherwise never touched. The differential is what it should be. It is always what it should be. The outside pushes very slightly less than the inside, which is by design, and which means that if the seal were ever to fail in a small way, the vault would breathe out rather than in. You check the emergency release housing without opening it, because opening it is a two-person operation requiring the overseer's counter-signature, and the housing has not been opened since the vault was sealed. There is a lead wire through the cover plate with a stamped tag on it. The stamp is a pre-war stamp. It is the only object you touch in the whole of your working life that has not been touched by anyone in this vault since the beginning. You check the door's own surface for corrosion at the 4 lower quadrants, where condensate would collect if condensate collected, which it does not, because the dehumidification on this run has never failed for long enough. Then you sign. The log for the door is not kept with the general maintenance logs. It has its own book, bound, oversize, and it lives on a shelf in the records room in a slipcase, and you carry it down here 4 times a year and carry it back. When you open it to the current page, you are opening a document that begins in the year the door closed and has not skipped a quarter since. You know the handwriting 3 generations back. Everybody who does this job knows the handwriting 3 generations back, because you are looking at it while you write, and because the columns are narrow and the entries are stacked. So a single spread covers about 15 years. Your grandmother's hand is on the page facing yours. It is small and it slants left, and she wrote her 6s with a closed loop, which nobody does now. She signed this book for 19 years. Her entries do not vary. 6 numbers, the differential, the grease level, initials. Once, in a winter, she wrote a note in the margin. It says that the indexing wheel felt stiff, and that she had cleaned and re-greased the train. That is the entire content of the note. It is the only sentence in 9 feet of shelf that is not a number, and you have read it more times than you would admit to anyone. You write your 6 numbers under hers. You write the differential. You initial. Here is the part that a person outside this door could not be made to understand, and the part that the operations manual states so flatly that it took you until you were 19 to see what it was actually saying. The protocol does not authorize you to open the door. It does not authorize the overseer to open the door either. Not on judgment, not on assessment, not on the evidence of instruments. There is no clause that says the door may open if the surface reads clean. There is no clause that says the door may open after a given number of years. What the protocol says is that the door opens upon receipt of the signal, and the signal is defined elsewhere in the document, in an appendix, in the sort of language that was written by somebody who was very sure the appendix would matter someday. The signal has not come. There is a receiver. There is a receiver, and it is checked on the same quarterly card as everything else, item 8, and it draws power, and it functions, and it has functioned continuously for 200 years, and it has never received anything at all. Item 8 is a self-test. You press the button, and a lamp lights, and the lamp lighting means that the receiver is capable of hearing a thing which has not been said. So the door is not locked, exactly. It is not welded, it is not jammed, it is not broken. Every component in the chain works. The grease is fresh, the rails are clean, the gear train is free, the power path is live, the seal is within tolerance at all 6 points. The vault door is, at this moment, in full working order and fully prepared to open. It is simply waiting for permission from an office that no longer exists. You put the card back in its slot. You close the book on your own initials and your grandmother's closed loop 6s, and you tuck it under your arm, and you stand for a second longer than the job requires, the way everyone does and nobody mentions, with your hand flat on cold plate that has 13 tons behind it, and 100 and some miles of country on the other side that you have only ever seen described. Then you walk back up the yellowed corridor toward the noise. The records room is on the second level, behind a door that sticks in its frame in the damp months and has done for longer than anyone can remember. And the trick is to lift with your left hand while you turn with your right. Nobody taught you that. You watched someone do it once when you were 9, and you have done it that way ever since. Inside, it is cooler than the corridor. That is deliberate. Paper wants dryness, and it wants steadiness. And somewhere in the original specification for this room, a person decided that a sealed population would generate documents, and that those documents would need to survive as long as the people did. And they routed a dedicated branch of the air handling in here to make sure of it. The vault will spend power on this room forever. It was designed to. You are here for a part number. The fan housing you gave up on this morning has a replacement listed somewhere in the consumables ledger. And the ledger is not on a terminal, because the terminal in this room stopped booting sometime before your mother was born, and the decision was made, sensibly, to go back to the books rather than fix it. So, the ledger is a book. It is one of about 400 books, and they are shelved by year, and the years run backward along the wall from the door until they run out. You start at the near end and you walk. This is the thing about the records room that residents who never come here do not understand. It is not an archive of the world. It is an archive of a building. 95% of what is on these shelves is maintenance. Filter changes, pump hours, water reclamation percentages logged twice daily for 200 years without a single gap, because the person on shift always signed, even in the bad years, even the year the growing decks failed over and everyone was on half. Even then, somebody walked down and read the gauge and wrote the number and initialed it. There is a stretch in the 80s where the handwriting gets very small and very careful, and the numbers get very bad, and then it recovers, and nobody in this room ever wrote a word about how they felt, which is, in its way, the honest record of what living here is. Here is what the vault actually knows about the surface, and it is worth being precise, because precision is rare in this, and everyone downstairs is imprecise about it constantly. The vault knows 3 things. It knows what it was told before the door shut. It knows what its instruments have measured through the intake stacks since, and it knows what it has inferred from those 2, which is the largest category and the least reliable. What it was told is a shelf and a half of orientation material, all of it printed before the war, all of it produced by the company that built this place. It describes conditions in general terms. It uses the words temporary and interim. It gives no coordinates, no neighbors, no distances, on the grounds, stated outright in one of the binders, that a resident's knowledge of the local area is not required for the resident's function, and may impede orderly conduct. That sentence is on a page you have read perhaps a dozen times, and it is typed, and the typeface is friendly. What the instruments measure is a single column of numbers taken at the intake, 4 readings a day, and it is the closest thing this vault has to a window. Radiation at the stack, air composition, particulate load, outside temperature. That is all. That is the entire aperture. 4 numbers, and everything anyone here believes about the world above comes out of it. And what has been inferred from those numbers is a whole tradition, because the radiation figure has been falling. Not quickly. It falls the way a shoreline moves. But it has fallen across the whole record, and everyone who has ever worked in this room has plotted it, and there are at least 6 separate hand-drawn charts on the wall by the ledgers, in 6 different hands, each one extending the last, each one a little more confident about where the line is going. The oldest is on the back of an inventory sheet. The newest is your predecessor's, and it stops 11 years ago, because she is dead now, and nobody has taken it up. The temperature column tells you there are seasons. The particulate column tells you there is weather. That is the extent of it. There is a whole cosmology down here, built out of 4 numbers taken at a pipe. You find the year you want, 7 shelves in, and the consumables ledger for that decade is a fat red book with a broken spine, and the part number is where you thought it would be, and the entry says 4 in stores, and the entry is from before you were born, and stores has not been counted since. You write the number on the back of your hand. You will find out this evening whether the 4 is real. On the way back, you stop, because the reels are out. There is a projector in the corner of the records room, and it is one of the few pre-war devices in this vault that has never been rebuilt, because nobody uses it hard enough to break it. The reels live in flat metal cans, labeled in the same friendly typeface. Somebody had them down recently. There is a can open on the table with the film half spooled, and you thread it, which takes a minute, and you turn the lamp on, and the wall goes bright. It is one of the standard reels. You have seen it perhaps 30 times in your life, most of them before you were 12, because these were shown to the children on a schedule, and the schedule was in the protocols, and the schedule is still followed. 2 viewings a year until 14. It was where you learned the word ocean. The reel shows a street. It is a wide street with cars parked along it at an angle, and the cars are enormous and have fins, and people walk on the sidewalk in coats. A man buys something from a stand. There is a building with a glass front, and the glass front is full of televisions all showing the same thing. A woman crosses in front of the camera and looks at it and looks away. There is a tree. You watch it the way everyone here watches it, which is not with longing. That is the mistake an outsider would expect. Down here, the reels are not a lost paradise. They are reference material. They are how you know what a tree is structurally. Trunk, branch, leaf, roughly that proportion. The way you know what a horse is from a diagram. When your work takes you to the growing decks and someone talks about scale, you have this footage to measure against, and it is the only thing you have. The real is not nostalgia, because nobody here has anything to be nostalgic for. It is instruction. And it is worth saying plainly what the real is, because the real was made for a purpose, and the purpose was not preservation. Somebody wrote it. There was a script, and the script was approved, and the footage was assembled by people in a room with a budget, and the whole thing was produced to be shown to residents inside a sealed installation for the specific reason that residents inside a sealed installation would need something to look at. It is a product. It was designed the same way the tap in your quarters was designed, by a department to a specification, against a cost target. There is a version of that meeting that actually happened. People sat in it. Someone said the footage should be pleasant but not too pleasant, because too pleasant creates a problem, and somebody else wrote that down, and then everyone had lunch. You are watching a corporate decision from before the war, and it is the closest you will ever come to a street. The reel runs 3.5 minutes. It ends the way it always ends, on the building with the televisions, and the lamp holds on the last frame for a second, and then the tail comes off the spool, and the wall goes white, and the room is very loud with the fan in the projector, and nothing else. That world existed. That is the part that people who have not lived in a sealed room struggle to hold properly. It is not a story. Those cars had owners who had to have them serviced. That glass front had a man who cleaned it and complained about it. The woman who looked at the camera went somewhere afterward and had a name, and the name is not written anywhere in this room, and neither is yours. You spool the film back by hand, which takes longer than the film took to run, and you put it in its can, and you close the can, and the lid seats with a sound the lid has been making since before the sky changed. The charts are still on the wall as you go past. 6 hands. A line coming down. The thing nobody in this room has ever written, in 200 years of impeccable record-keeping, is what the line coming down would mean, because it does not mean anything procedurally. The protocol does not reference the intake stack. The protocol references a signal. Whatever the number at the stack does, whatever the shoreline does, the door opens when the office says so, and the office is on a shelf and a half of friendly typeface, and it is not going to say so. So the charts are a hobby, 6 generations of a hobby, extended in 6 hands, plotted carefully by people who understood perfectly well that they were plotting weather they would never stand in. You put the red ledger back in its slot, 7 shelves in, and you square it against its neighbors, because it goes back square. That is how it is done. You take the part number, written on the back of your hand, and you go out through the door that sticks, lifting with your left, turning with your right. Behind you, the room stays cool and dry and lit, spending power to keep paper alive. The mess is loud by the time you get there, and the loudness is a particular kind you have never had any way of comparing to anything else. 218 people in a room built for 300 at the hour when the second shift comes off, and the third has not gone on. And every one of those voices belongs to somebody whose face you could pick out of a line with your eyes half shut. There are no strangers. There has never been a stranger. The last person to enter this vault from outside did so before your grandmother was born, and the last person to leave has not existed at all. You take a tray. The tray is aluminum, and it has a number stamped in the corner, and the number is not yours. Trays are not assigned, but you notice numbers now the way you notice everything with a serial on it, which is a maintenance habit and not a personality. Dinner is the mash, which is what everyone calls it, and what the menu board calls preparation for. And tonight, it has the potatoes through it, and a scatter of something green that came off the upper growing deck this morning. It is warm. It is the same as it was 8 days ago, and it will be the same 8 days from now. And there is a kind of peace in that which you would not be able to explain to anyone who had a choice about what they ate. You sit where you sit. Maintenance sits near the serving line, because maintenance gets called out of dinner more than anyone else, and sitting near the line means the runner can find you without shouting across 200 people. Nobody wrote that down. It is simply where maintenance sits, and where maintenance has always sat. And if you took a tray to the far tables tonight, 3 separate people would ask if something was wrong. That is worth slowing down for, because it is the whole architecture of the evening. In a place this size, with a population this fixed, almost nothing that governs behavior is written in the protocols. The protocols cover the door, the reactor, the water, the head count, the chain of authority. Everything else, where you sit, who speaks first, whose turn it is to be right about something, how long a grudge is allowed to last, is carried in the population itself, passed down and enforced by nothing more formal than the fact that everyone will still be here tomorrow. Consider what that does to conflict. Out on the surface, an argument that goes badly can be solved by distance. Somebody walks. A caravan hand, who cannot stand the caravan, master signs with another company at the next town. A settler who is finished with his neighbors goes and is a settler somewhere else. And the wasteland is enormous, and there is always somewhere else. There is no somewhere else. There are 9 decks, and a person you cannot stand tonight will be at the tap tomorrow morning, and at the council in 2 weeks, and at your mother's funeral, and you will be at theirs, whichever way round it goes. So the vault does not resolve conflict. The vault metabolizes it. Arguments are conducted at a volume calibrated to be survivable, and they end without a winner more often than not, and both parties go back to being civil in a way that would look insincere from outside and is not insincere at all. It is the only functional arrangement available. Being right is worth almost nothing here. Being someone who can be worked beside for 40 more years is worth everything. And that shapes the marriage rotation, which is the part of vault life that visitors, if there were visitors, would find strangest. Nobody is assigned a spouse. That is worth saying plainly, because the assumption runs the other way. What exists is a register, kept by the clinic, of who is related to whom, and how closely, and a set of pairings the clinic will not approve, and a considerably larger set it will. Within that, people choose. They choose from a pool of perhaps a dozen people in a suitable age band who are not too near a cousin. and they choose knowing the register is on the wall, and the clinic signs off, and the ceremony is held in this room, with the tables pushed back. 12 is not many. Everybody knows it is not many. What the clinic worries about is not romance, which is nobody's business, but the register itself, the slow narrowing of the lines, the arithmetic of a closed population across 6 generations. There are families here that cannot marry each other any longer in any combination, and the clinic knows exactly which, and it is written in a green book, and the green book is consulted before anything else. Job assignment works on the same principle from the other end. You did not choose maintenance. At 15, you sat the aptitudes, and the aptitudes are a pre-war instrument with a pre-war typeface and questions about clerical filing systems that stopped existing 2 centuries ago. And they put you where the vault needed a body, more than they put you where the paper suggested. Your friend from the same cohort tested high on everything and went to hydroponics, because hydroponics had a gap that year. Nobody hid this. It was explained to you at 15 in a small office, kindly, by a man who had had the same conversation about himself 30 years earlier. The runner does not come for you tonight, which is unusual enough that you notice it, and you finish the mash and take the tray to the line and go through to the council. The council is held in the mess with the tables pushed back, the same as the ceremonies, because it is the only room that holds everyone who wants to come. Attendance is not required. Roughly 60 people come, which is about typical, and the 60 are not a random 60. They are the section leads, the clinic, the older residents who have come to every council for 40 years, and would notice the day one was skipped, and whoever has a stake in the item on the board. Tonight, the item on the board is the number 7 circulation pump on the lower growing deck, which has been running warm for 11 days and off its rated draw for 4, and which you personally have had the housing off twice. The section lead speaks first. That is the order. The person nearest the problem, then anyone with a claim on the outcome, then the overseer. The lead is careful and slow, and reads from a card, and what the card says is that the pump can be rebuilt from the stock on hand, or it can be swapped out for the spare, and there are 2 spares, and after those 2, there is nothing anybody in this room knows how to make. Then hydroponics speaks, because the pump is theirs. Then power, because the pump is on their bus. Then the clinic, briefly, about what the growing deck does to the ration schedule if it goes down. Then a man from the 3rd shift stands and says the same thing he says at every council, which is that the maintenance rotation is understaffed and has been for a decade, and he is correct, and he has been correct for a decade, and everyone listens to the whole of it, because he is entitled to say it, and because he will be here at the next one. And then the overseer says what the vault will do. Not proposes, says. This is the point where the evening stops being a discussion and becomes a record. The overseer hears the room, and the hearing is genuine. You can watch it happening. You can see the decision move on the man's face while power is talking. And then he speaks, and what he speaks becomes the thing that happens, and the clerk writes it in the book, and the book is the same book. The protocols are direct about this. The overseer's authority over the operation of the vault is total, subject to no vote, and the council exists in the paperwork as a mechanism for the overseer to receive information. That is the actual wording, near enough. Not to receive instruction. To receive information. Here is the part that takes some sitting with. In practice, most of the time, that distinction does not bite. The overseer usually decides what the room was going to decide anyway, because the room contains everyone who knows anything, and the overseer is not a fool. 9 councils in 10, the authority is invisible, and it looks like a meeting. But it is not a meeting, and everyone in the room knows exactly what it is, and that knowledge is doing quiet work all evening. It changes how the third shift man phrases his complaint, which he pitches as a report rather than a demand. It changes what hydroponics does not say. It changes the fact that nobody has ever, in 6 generations, asked out loud at a council whether the door might be opened, because the door is not an operational matter subject to information. The door is protocol, and protocol is the office, and the office is on a shelf. Tonight the overseer says, rebuild it. Keep both spares. Pull a hand off the ventilation rotation for 4 days to do it. The hand off the ventilation rotation is you. You find this out the way you find most things out, which is by hearing your section named while looking at the floor. The clerk writes it down. Somebody asks about the ration schedule and gets an answer that is not really an answer, and the room accepts it, because the room accepted the answer to that question last year as well. And then the tables come back out, and it is over, and the noise resumes at a slightly lower pitch than dinner, and people stand around in the way they do, and the third shift man and the section lead are talking perfectly pleasantly about something else entirely, which is the whole system working exactly as designed. You take the part number off the back of your hand and copy it into your own book before it smudges, because you will need it in the morning. And the morning is now 4 days of pump. The corridors after council have a particular quality that you have never had a reason to name, because you have never known any other building. The people who were all in one room 10 minutes ago are now distributed back through 4 decks, and for a while the sound of that redistribution moves through the vault ahead of the people themselves. Footsteps on the stair grating, a door on the residential level that has needed adjusting since before you were born, and announces every use, somebody laughing 2 turns of corridor away, in a way that arrives without any of the words attached. You are on last rounds. It is not a formal assignment. It is a thing maintenance does at the end of a second shift, because the alternative is finding out about a problem 8 hours later, and 8 hours is enough time for a small thing to become a thing that costs parts. So you walk it. You start at the mess, where 2 people are stacking the long tables against the wall in the order they always go, largest first, and you check the extractor hood above the cooking line, because the hood is a known offender. You put your palm flat against the grill and feel for pull. It pulls. You do not write this down anywhere. Nobody writes down the things that are fine. Down 1 level, the corridor lighting is already stepping. This is automatic, and it has been automatic for 200 years. And it is one of the few systems in the vault that has never required a single intervention from your section, which makes it slightly mysterious to you in the way that a well person is slightly mysterious to a doctor. The lights do not go out all at once. They step. The overhead panels drop to about 1/3, And then, a few minutes later, the wall-level strips take over from the overheads entirely. And then those go amber. And the effect is that you can always see where the floor is, and never see anything else clearly. Somebody designed that. Somebody sat with a lighting schedule and decided that a population sealed underground would sleep better if the transition from day to night was performed in 3 unhurried movements rather than 1, and that same somebody, or somebody at a desk near them, also decided that the door would never open. Both decisions came out of the same building. Both were presumably defensible in the meeting where they were made. You check the water riser on the residential deck, which is the job you actually came down here to do. The riser has a bleed valve at the top of its run, and the valve weeps, and it has wept for as long as anyone alive remembers, at a rate of roughly nothing. You have a small tin cup wired to the pipe beneath it. On a normal night, the cup holds a swallow. Tonight, the cup holds a swallow. You tip it into the reclamation grate, hang it back on its wire, and move on. This is what the job is. Almost all of it is confirming that a thing is doing what it did yesterday. The pump you will spend the next 4 days rebuilding is on the deck below, and you go and stand in front of it for a while with your hands in your pockets, which is not a diagnostic procedure and does not appear in any manual. It is running. It sounds the way it has sounded for 6 weeks, which is to say, it sounds slightly wrong in a way you could not have described to the council in words, but could pick out of a room with your eyes shut. Tomorrow, you will take the housing off it and lay its insides on a cloth, in an order you will have to remember. And you will replace what needs replacing out of a drawer whose contents were catalogued before your grandmother was born. And then you will put it back together, and it will run properly again. And nobody outside your section will ever know that anything happened. That is worth stopping on the last walk of the day. You can keep a 200-year-old machine alive with what is in a drawer, not metaphorically, actually. You know the sound this pump makes when its bearing is fine, and the sound it makes when the bearing is beginning to think about not being fine, and you know the difference between the two. And the difference is small, and you know it anyway, and you learned it from a man who learned it from a woman, in a chain of people going back to the ones who were handed this building new and told to keep it. You know which fasteners on the housing you can reuse, and which two you cannot. You know that the seal will want warming before it seats. You know that the drawer's 3rd tray has been mislabeled since a re-inventory in your father's time, and that the correct part is 1 slot to the left of where the paper says. None of that is written down in any complete way. Some of it is in the logs, and most of it is not, because a log records what was done and not what was understood. The understanding lives in you and in about 9 other people, and it is passed hand to hand in the way you were taught it, which is standing next to someone with a light while they work, and being told not now, watch, and then later you do it. That is a real thing to be good at. It is not a small thing. Whole professions on the surface, according to the reels, involved less knowledge held more loosely. There is a competence in this vault, distributed across a few hundred people, that has kept air moving and water clean, and lights stepping through 6 generations without a single delivery, a single outside specialist, a single replacement unit shipped in from anywhere. Whatever else is true, that was done. You are part of the doing of it. And somebody drew this up. That is the other half, and it does not cancel the first half, and the first half does not soften it either. They sit next to each other, and they both stay true. There was an office. There were people in it who came in on a morning, in a city that still had mornings, and worked on a plan for a shelter whose door was specified to remain sealed regardless of surface conditions. And that specification was not an accident or an oversight or a failure of a mechanism. It was written. It was checked by somebody. It was signed off. There is a version of that document that exists in your archive right now, on a shelf you have walked past, in language so procedural that it took you a year of reading around it to understand what it was actually saying. And then whoever wrote it went home, ate something, slept, came back the next day and worked on the ventilation schedule, or the lighting steps, or the marriage rotation tables with the same care, because it was all the same job. The building keeps immaculate records. That is the thing about it that you notice more the longer you spend in the archive. It knows the serial number of every fan housing. It knows how much water left the tank in a week 11 decades ago. It knows the calibration drift of a gauge in a corridor almost nobody walks down. It knows the designed population and the designed yield and the designed lifespan of every component in its own body, in detail, in triplicate, on shelves. It does not know your name. It knows your section. It knows your rotation. It knows that a hand was pulled off ventilation for 4 days to rebuild a pump, and the clock wrote that down tonight. And in 80 years, somebody in your job will read that line, and it will say what was done, and it will not say who. You are, in the vault's own paperwork, a labor hour in a category. That is not cruelty on the vault's part. The vault is a building. It is the shape of the intention that made it, which was interested in the pump. You did not agree to this. Neither did your mother, who was born here, or her mother, who was born here. Nobody in 6 generations has been asked a single question about the fundamental terms of their life, because the terms were settled in an office before any of you existed, and the only party to the arrangement who could have renegotiated it stopped existing on an afternoon in October, 200 years ago, along with the city the office was in. So the paperwork stands, and you keep the building alive. And both of those things are simply true at the same time, every day, forever. And there is nothing in the schedule that has any opinion about it. The corridor strips have gone amber while you have been standing here. You did not notice them do it. You put your hand on the pump housing, flat the way you did on the extractor hood, and you feel the running through the metal. Steady, slightly wrong, wrong in the way you will fix. And you leave it running because it will run fine for 4 more days, and then it will run properly for another 60 years, and you will be an old person by then. And someone you have not met yet will be the one who hears when it starts to change again. You take the stair up rather than the ladder, because the ladder is loud on residential at this hour. The last of the light on this level is the strip along the base of the wall, ankle height, amber, laid down in a continuous line that runs the length of the corridor and turns the corner and keeps going. Past the door you will not open, past the deck where the seeds are, past the room where the paperwork is, all the way around and back to itself. Somewhere below, the pump keeps its slightly wrong time. The door stays shut. The last strip steps down.